22 years building brake systems for Ford, and they hand my department to a kid who thinks torque specs are a suggestion. That's how I'd sum up what happened at Midwest Automotive Components last spring. My name's Greg Matthews, 48 years old, and I just watched the biggest manufacturing scandal in Detroit since the Takata airbag recalls. Except this one never made the news, because sometimes the right people know exactly how to bury the truth. Let me paint you a picture of what 22 years of loyalty gets you in corporate America today. I started at Mac in 2001, fresh out of my divorce, desperate for stability. Single dad with 2 kids and a mother who was already showing early signs of what we'd later learn was Alzheimer's. The plant was booming then, 3 shifts, overtime every weekend, and Ford contracts worth $800 million annually. I worked every position on that floor. Started on the line, moved to quality control, then inspection, then floor supervisor. By 2015, I was operations manager for the entire brake component division. I knew every machine, every safety protocol, every supplier specification by heart. When Ford's quality auditors showed up unannounced, they asked for me by name. But here's what nobody tells you about manufacturing in 2023. Experience doesn't matter anymore. What matters is who you know and whether you have the right letters after your name. Enter Kyle Jamison, 25 years old, MBA from Northwestern, and nephew to our CEO, Jack Jamison. Kyle walked into our plant last January wearing a suit that cost more than most of our guys make in a month. Fresh-faced, confident, talking about lean methodology and efficiency optimization like he'd invented the concepts. The plant manager introduced him as our new director of operations, a position that didn't exist the week before but somehow ranked above my 2 decades of earned authority. I'll give Kyle credit. He was polite. Called me sir in meetings, nodded enthusiastically when I explained our processes, took careful notes in his leather portfolio. But politeness doesn't prevent catastrophe when you're dealing with automotive safety standards. The first red flag came in February. Kyle approved a batch of brake rotor blanks that were 0.02 millimeters outside Ford's tolerance specifications. In automotive manufacturing, that's like being a little bit pregnant. There's no acceptable margin for error when you're talking about stopping a 2-ton vehicle traveling 70 miles per hour. I caught it during routine inspection and flagged the batch for rework. Kyle overruled me, said the deviation was within acceptable parameters for cost optimization. I explained that Ford's specifications weren't suggestions, they were requirements backed by federal safety regulations. Kyle smiled and said he'd take responsibility for the decision. That batch went to Ford's Dearborn plant and passed their incoming inspection. Pure luck because their inspector was rushing to meet quota, but I documented everything, photographed the measurements, and filed my concerns with plant management. Next section, how I discovered Kyle was systematically compromising safety standards while building a case to remove me from oversight. 3 weeks after the rotor incident, I started noticing a pattern. Kyle was approving material certifications without proper metallurgical testing. Standard procedure requires every steel batch to undergo tensile strength analysis. It's literally federal law under DOT safety regulations. But Kyle was signing off on certificates from our supplier in Ohio based solely on their paperwork. I approached Tommy Walsh, our senior quality inspector, about running independent tests on the incoming materials. Tommy's been with Mac for 15 years, has 2 daughters in college, and knows the political landscape better than anyone. "Greg, I can't afford to rock the boat right now," Tommy said during our smoke break behind Building C. "Michelle's tuition is due next month, and Sarah's got another year at state. If management thinks I'm questioning their decisions..." Tommy had documentation showing 3 separate batches of steel that came in below specification, but Kyle had approved them all. The supplier, Great Lakes Steel in Youngstown, had been cutting corners to meet price targets. Their mill certificates showed perfect numbers, but when Tommy ran spot checks using our Rockwell hardness tester, the results told a different story. "Look at this," Tommy showed me the readout on his tablet. Specification calls for 32 HRC minimum. This batch is testing at 29.5. Put this steel in a brake rotor, and you're looking at premature wear, possible cracking under thermal stress. But Tommy wouldn't go on record. He had too much to lose. That's when I made my first mistake. Instead of building a careful case, I went straight to Kyle with the evidence. I found him in his office at 7 a.m. before the day shift started, thinking I could handle this quietly between professionals. "Kyle, we've got a problem with the Great Lakes steel shipments," I started, showing him Tommy's test results. "These materials don't meet Ford's specifications. We need to quarantine the affected inventory, and Kyle cut me off. Greg, I appreciate your diligence, but I've reviewed the supplier certifications personally. Great Lakes Steel is a preferred vendor with Ford. Their documentation is sufficient for our quality management system. Kyle, the documentation is falsified. Our independent tests show. Are you suggesting that Ford's preferred vendor is committing fraud? The way he said it, with that MBA smirk, made something snap inside me. I'm suggesting that you don't know the difference between a mill certificate and toilet paper. You're 25 years old with zero manufacturing experience, and you're gambling with people's lives. The words hung in the air between us. Kyle's expression shifted from condescension to something colder. Greg, I think you need to take a step back and remember that I'm your supervisor. This kind of insubordination is exactly the attitude problem that senior management has been discussing. He was building a file on me. I could see it in his eyes. Next section. How Kyle's counterattack began and why the plant's union rep couldn't help me navigate the corporate politics. After my confrontation with Kyle, I went to see Danny Kowalski, our UAW Local 228 shop steward. Danny's been fighting management battles for 12 years, knows every clause in our collective bargaining agreement. I figured he'd have my back on a safety issue this clear-cut. Greg, listen to me carefully, Danny said, leaning against his desk in the union trailer. Kyle Jameson isn't just some random MBA. He's Jack Jameson's nephew. Jack sits on the board of Ford's Supplier Council. You understand what that means? I understood. Mac held 4 major Ford contracts worth $300 million annually. Jack Jameson didn't just run our plant. He had direct relationships with Ford's procurement executives. Cross him, and Mac could lose preferred supplier status overnight. But Danny, we're talking about safety violations. Federal DOT regulations. The union has to protect jobs, Greg. All 600 of them. You think Ford's going to keep buying from us if they hear we've got internal quality disputes? They'll switch to Thompson Industries in Tennessee faster than you can say right to work state. Danny showed me the reality of modern manufacturing unions. They weren't the powerhouses of the 1970s anymore. With Mexico producing brake components at 40% of our labor costs and Tennessee offering tax incentives Ford couldn't ignore, Mac's survival depended on political relationships more than worker solidarity. File your safety concerns through proper channels, Danny advised. Document everything, but don't make this personal with Kyle. Management's already talking about efficiency improvements and redundancy elimination. You want to give them an excuse to restructure your position out of existence? That afternoon, Kyle called me into his office for what he termed a performance discussion. Present were Linda Chen from HR and Kyle's assistant, a nervous 20-something named Amy, who took notes throughout our conversation. Greg, we need to discuss your attitude toward new management initiatives, Kyle began, reading from a prepared script. Multiple colleagues have reported that you've been resistant to process improvements and questioning established vendor relationships. This was corporate speak for building a termination file. I'd seen it happen to 3 other veteran employees over the past 2 years. First came the performance discussions, then the corrective action plans, then the inevitable position elimination due to organizational restructuring. Kyle, my concerns are about safety compliance, not management initiatives. When brake components fail, people die. That's not corporate politics, that's physics. Linda Chen interrupted. Greg, Mac has maintained ISO 9001 certification for 8 consecutive years. Our quality management system exceeds industry standards. Are you suggesting our processes are inadequate? The trap was perfectly laid. If I said yes, I was questioning the entire company's competence. If I said no, I was admitting my concerns were unfounded. Either way, Kyle's HR file on me got stronger. I'm suggesting that recent material approvals haven't followed established testing protocols, I said carefully. I have documentation showing discrepancies between supplier certifications and independent verification tests. Kyle leaned forward. Greg, questioning the integrity of Ford's preferred vendors is a serious allegation. Do you have evidence of actual fraud, or are you simply disagreeing with management decisions? They had me cornered. Accusing Great Lakes Steel of fraud without absolute proof would be career suicide. But accepting substandard materials could literally be actual suicide for drivers whose brakes failed at highway speeds. I chose the middle path that satisfied nobody. I'm requesting additional verification testing on incoming materials to ensure compliance with federal safety standards. Noted, Kyle said while Amy scribbled furiously. We'll take your concerns under advisement. Translation. They'd ignore everything while documenting my disruptive behavior for future reference. Next section. how I discovered Kyle was systematically replacing safety inspectors with his own people, and why my mother's declining health became leverage against me. 2 weeks after my HR meeting, Kyle began what I can only describe as a systematic purge of anyone who might question his decisions. First to go was Rita Vasquez, our most experienced quality inspector with 18 years on the job. Kyle transferred her to third shift inventory management, claiming it was a lateral move to broaden her skill set. Rita came to me the day before her transfer. "Greg, they're replacing me with someone from Kyle's MBA program at Northwestern. Some kid named Jason who's never seen the inside of a manufacturing plant. He doesn't even know how to operate the coordinate measuring machine." The coordinate measuring machine, our CMM, was a $300,000 piece of German engineering that measured component dimensions to within 0.0001 inches. Operating it required months of training and years of experience to interpret results properly. Jason's qualifications consisted of a business degree and personal loyalty to Kyle. Next, Kyle moved Tom Bradley, our metallurgy specialist, to special projects that kept him away from incoming material inspection. Tom had been catching Great Lakes Steel's substandard materials, so removing him cleared Kyle's path to approve whatever came through the door. But Kyle's masterstroke was targeting my personal vulnerabilities. He scheduled mandatory weekend quality audits, knowing I couldn't attend because those were my days with Mom. Every Saturday and Sunday, I drove to Sunrise Manor to spend time with my mother, Dorothy, whose Alzheimer's was progressing faster than the doctors had predicted. Mom still recognized me most days, but her grip on recent memories was slipping. She'd ask about my ex-wife Sharon like we were still married, or wonder why my son Andy hadn't visited, forgetting he lived in Portland now. Those weekend hours were becoming precious, maybe the last coherent conversations we'd ever have. Kyle knew this. He'd asked about my family situation during our first meeting, feigning interest in work-life balance. Now he weaponized that information. "Greg, I understand you have personal commitments," Kyle said during another HR meeting, "but quality oversight requires consistent presence. Our Ford contract review is coming up, and we need full management participation in weekend audits." Linda from HR nodded sympathetically. "The company values work-life balance, Greg, but some positions require flexibility during critical periods. Can you adjust your personal schedule to accommodate these business requirements?" I was trapped. Refusing the weekend audits would be documented as failure to meet position requirements. But attending meant abandoning Mom during her most lucid hours when she still remembered my name and asked about my day at the plant. The breaking point came in March. I arrived at work Monday morning to find Jason, Kyle's inexperienced replacement inspector, had approved an entire shipment of brake pad friction materials without proper testing. The materials came from a new supplier in Mexico, Frenos del Norte, that wasn't even on Ford's approved vendor list. I pulled the batch for inspection and discovered the friction coefficient was 12% below specification. In brake pad terms, that meant stopping distances would increase by nearly 15 feet at 60 miles per hour. The difference between a fender bender and a fatality. I documented everything: photographs, test results, supplier certifications that didn't match the physical materials. Then I made my second critical mistake. Instead of following Kyle's chain of command, I went directly to Jack Jameson himself. Jack's corner office overlooked the plant floor through floor-to-ceiling windows. From his desk, he could watch 600 employees building the brake components that would eventually stop millions of vehicles across America. I thought that responsibility would matter to him. "Mr. Jameson, we have the serious safety issue with recently approved materials," I began, spreading my documentation across his mahogany desk. "These brake pad materials don't meet Ford specifications, and they came from an unapproved supplier." Jack studied the paperwork for maybe 30 seconds before looking up with the same expression I'd seen on Kyle's face: polite dismissal mixed with irritation. "Greg, I appreciate your attention to detail, but Kyle assures me he's implemented improved efficiency protocols. Are you questioning my nephew's competence?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Answer wrong, and my 22-year career would end that afternoon. Next section: how my direct challenge to Jack Jameson backfired spectacularly, and why Ford's surprise audit became both my salvation and my downfall. "Greg, I hired Kyle specifically to modernize our operations and improve profitability," Jack said, straightening his tie. "If you can't adapt to new leadership styles, perhaps it's time to consider whether you're still the right fit for this organization." That was corporate speak for shut up or get out. I gathered my documentation and left Jack's office knowing I'd just painted a target on my back. Within 2 hours, Linda from HR called me for another performance discussion. But sometimes the universe has a sense of timing that no corporate politics can control. 3 days after my meeting with Jack, Ford's quality assurance team showed up for an unscheduled audit. Not the routine quarterly review we'd been preparing for, but a surprise deep dive inspection triggered by customer complaints about brake performance in their F-150 trucks. The audit team leader was Patricia Donnelly, a 30-year Ford veteran who'd seen every trick suppliers use to cut corners. She arrived Thursday morning with 2 metallurgy specialists and a quality systems auditor, armed with portable testing equipment and access to Ford's complaint database. We've received 14 customer reports of premature brake pad wear on F-150s manufactured between January and March, Patricia announced during the opening meeting. All vehicles contained brake pads sourced from MAC during that period. We're here to determine root cause. Kyle tried to charm his way through the audit, explaining his streamlined approval processes and vendor optimization initiatives. Patricia listened politely, then asked to see the actual test data for materials approved during his tenure. I watched Kyle's confidence evaporate when Patricia's metallurgy specialist ran independent tests on samples from our current inventory. The friction materials from Frenos del Norte, Kyle's unapproved Mexican supplier, failed every single specification test. This material exhibits 12% lower friction coefficient than specified, the specialist reported. Thermal stability testing shows degradation at temperatures 40 degrees below requirement. These brake pads would lose effectiveness under normal highway braking conditions. Patricia turned to Kyle with the expression of someone who'd caught a child lying about homework. Mr. Jameson, can you explain why MAC approved materials that don't meet Ford's safety specifications? Kyle stammered about cost optimization and vendor diversification, but Patricia cut him off. Cost optimization doesn't override safety requirements. Who authorized the use of this unapproved supplier? Kyle glanced at me, probably hoping I'd jump in and share responsibility. Instead, I handed Patricia my complete documentation file, photographs, test results, email communications, and my written objections to Kyle's decisions. I documented my concerns about these materials when they first arrived, I said. Mr. Jameson overruled my recommendations and approved them for production. Patricia spent the next 2 hours reviewing my documentation. Every photograph was time-stamped. Every test result was signed and witnessed. Every email showed my attempts to prevent substandard materials from reaching Ford's assembly lines. Mr. Matthews, this documentation is exemplary, Patricia said. Your testing protocols exceed Ford's requirements. Why weren't these concerns escalated to plant management? I explained my attempts to work through proper channels, including my meetings with Kyle and Jack Jameson. Patricia took notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions about MAC's quality management hierarchy. On Friday afternoon, Patricia delivered her preliminary findings to MAC's senior management. I wasn't invited to that meeting, but Tommy Walsh had friends in the administrative office who heard everything. Ford's suspending MAC's brake pad contracts pending corrective action, Tommy reported during our smoke break. They want Kyle removed from any quality oversight role, and they want you to personally certify all brake-related materials going forward. But victory came with a price I hadn't anticipated. That same Friday, I got a call from Sunrise Manor. Mom had suffered what the nurses called a significant cognitive decline event. She'd gotten confused during lunch, become agitated when staff tried to help her, and spent 3 hours asking for her deceased husband. We think the stress of recent changes in her routine might have accelerated the progression, the head nurse explained. Has there been anything unusual in her family situation lately? I realized that my weekend absences, caused by Kyle's mandatory quality audits, had disrupted Mom's carefully maintained schedule. The familiar rhythm of our Saturday visits had been her anchor to reality. Without that consistency, her mind had drifted further into the fog of Alzheimer's. When I visited Mom that Saturday, she looked at me with polite confusion. "Excuse me, young man, but do I know you? Are you here to fix something?" The woman who'd raised me, who'd taught me the value of hard work and standing up for what's right, no longer recognized her own son. Next section. How Kyle's removal led to unexpected consequences, and why winning the battle nearly cost me everything that mattered. Kyle's removal from quality oversight became effective the following Monday. Ford's directive was clear. He could maintain his Director of Operations title, but all brake-related decisions had to go through me. Kyle's office suddenly felt smaller when he called me in for what he termed a collaborative discussion about moving forward. "Greg, I want to put our differences behind us," Kyle said. his Northwestern MBA confidence replaced by something closer to desperation. Ford's made their position clear, and I respect their quality standards. I'd like to learn from your experience. It should have felt like victory. Instead, sitting across from Kyle's mahogany desk, all I could think about was Mom asking if I was there to fix something. The woman who'd worked double shifts at Ford's Rouge plant to put me through community college no longer knew my face. Kyle, the learning curve for automotive quality standards isn't measured in weeks or months. It takes years to understand why these specifications exist. Every measurement, every test, every protocol was written in somebody's blood. Kyle nodded earnestly, but I could see the calculation behind his eyes. He was 25 years old with an MBA and family connections. Even if Ford had clipped his wings temporarily, he'd outlast me in corporate politics. Time was on his side. My son Andy called that evening while I was reviewing Ford's corrective action requirements. He'd heard about the audit through industry connections in Portland, where he worked as a project manager for Nike. Dad, Tommy Walsh's brother-in-law, told him you basically saved Ford from a massive recall. That's huge. Why do you sound so miserable? I explained about Mom's decline, how my weekend absences had accelerated her confusion. Andy was quiet for a long moment. Dad, you did the right thing. Grandma wouldn't want you to compromise safety standards because of her condition. She raised you better than that. Maybe Andy was right, but knowing Mom couldn't remember raising me made his reassurance feel hollow. I'd won a professional battle by sacrificing precious time with the woman who'd taught me to fight for what's right. The next month brought mixed developments. Ford reinstated MAC's brake pad contracts with enhanced oversight requirements. I personally had to sign off on every material certification, every supplier approval, every process change. My signature became the final authority on components that would stop millions of vehicles. But the corporate machinery was already working to minimize my influence. Jack Jameson hired 2 additional quality engineers, both recent graduates from Kyle's Northwestern network. They reported to Kyle, not to me, creating a parallel quality organization that could eventually bypass my oversight. Tommy Walsh saw it coming. Greg, they're building your replacement team. Give it 6 months, and they'll have enough Northwestern MBAs to convince Ford you're no longer essential. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd fought so hard to maintain quality standards that I'd made myself a target for elimination. Corporate America doesn't reward whistleblowers. It tolerates them temporarily while planning their removal. Patricia Donnelly from Ford called me directly in May with an offer I hadn't expected. Greg, we've been impressed with your documentation and technical knowledge. Ford is expanding our supplier quality team. Would you consider joining us as a senior quality engineer? The offer was attractive. 20% salary increase, better benefits, and direct employment with Ford instead of a supplier relationship that could be terminated at any time. But taking the job would mean admitting defeat at MAC, abandoning 22 years of institutional knowledge to Kyle's inexperienced leadership. Patricia, I appreciate the offer, but MAC has 600 employees depending on Ford contracts. If I leave now, Kyle's going to approve whatever materials maximize profit margins. People are going to get hurt. Greg, you can't single-handedly hold up quality standards at every Ford supplier. Eventually, you have to trust the system to work without you. That conversation haunted me for weeks. Was I staying at Mac out of genuine concern for safety, or was I just too stubborn to admit when I'd been beaten? The line between principle and pride isn't always clear when you're standing on it. Next section. The final confrontation with Jack Jameson, and how sometimes winning means knowing when to walk away. The decision came down to a conversation with Jack Jameson in June. He called me into his office on a Friday afternoon when most of the plant had already gone home for the weekend. The timing wasn't coincidental. Jack wanted privacy for what he was about to propose. Greg, you've made your point about quality standards, Jack began, pouring himself bourbon from the bottle he kept in his desk drawer. Ford's happy, the audit findings are resolved, and Mac's contracts are secure. But we need to discuss your future here. He offered me a drink, which I declined. I'd learned that accepting hospitality from management was often the first step toward accepting compromise. The board has approved a promotion for you. Director of Quality Assurance with a 15% salary increase. Kyle would report to you on all quality matters, and you'd have final authority over supplier approvals. It sounded like everything I'd fought for, but Jack's next words revealed the catch. In return, we need your commitment to work collaboratively with Kyle's operational improvements. The Northwestern quality engineers he's hired bring fresh perspectives on efficiency optimization. We can't have you blocking every initiative that doesn't match traditional methods. Translation: take the promotion and title, but let Kyle's people gradually erode the standards I'd spent months defending. It was a golden handcuff disguised as recognition. Jack, those efficiency optimizations nearly caused a recall that would have destroyed Mac's relationship with Ford. How many more chances are we going to give untested processes before someone gets killed? Jack's expression hardened. Greg, you're 58 years old with 22 years of service. You're eligible for early retirement with full pension benefits. That's a generous package that not everyone in your situation would receive. The threat was crystal clear. Take the promotion and play along, or take early retirement and lose the influence to prevent future safety compromises. Either way, Jack was removing me as an obstacle to Kyle's corporate ambitions. I thought about Mom, sitting in Sunrise Manor asking nurses if someone was coming to fix something. I thought about the F-150 drivers who'd never know their brake pads had failed Ford's safety specifications. I thought about Tommy Walsh's daughters in college and the 600 Mac employees who depended on Ford contracts for their livelihoods. Jack, I'll take the early retirement package, but I have one condition. I want to personally train my replacement on Ford's quality requirements. Someone with actual manufacturing experience, not another Northwestern MBA. Jack agreed, probably relieved to have me gone without a fight. We settled on August 31st as my last day, giving me 2 months to document processes and train whoever they hired. That weekend, I called Patricia Donnelly at Ford and accepted her offer. Starting September 5th, I'd be a senior quality engineer with Ford's supplier quality team, earning 20% more than my max salary and working directly for the company whose standards I'd spent my career defending. The irony was perfect. After 22 years of fighting to maintain Ford's requirements at Mac, I'd finally be working for Ford itself, with authority to audit suppliers like my former employer. Tommy Walsh threw me a retirement party at Murphy's Bar on Jefferson Avenue. Half the plant showed up, including some of Kyle's Northwestern engineers who probably came to make sure I was really leaving. Danny Kowalski from the union gave a speech about standing up for safety principles even when it cost you everything. Greg Matthews never backed down from a fight when people's lives were on the line, Danny said, raising his beer bottle. That's the kind of courage this industry needs more of. But sitting in that crowded bar, surrounded by coworkers who respected what I'd done, all I could think about was Mom asking if I was there to fix something. I'd fixed Mac's quality problems and Ford's brake pad specifications, but I couldn't fix the one thing that mattered most. Kyle approached me during the party, extending his hand with what looked like genuine respect. Greg, I learned more about manufacturing in 6 months working with you than I did in 2 years of business school. I hope there are no hard feelings about how things ended. I shook his hand because holding grudges doesn't change the past. Kyle, you've got good instincts, but this industry doesn't forgive mistakes. Every shortcut you take, every test you skip, every specification you bend, eventually it all comes back to haunt you. Remember that. 3 weeks later, I started my new job at Ford's Dearborn headquarters. My first assignment was auditing supplier quality systems for brake components. The irony wasn't lost on anyone when Mac appeared on my audit schedule for October. Next section. How coming full circle at Ford gave me the perspective to understand what I'd really won and lost. My first day at Ford's World headquarters felt like stepping into a different universe. The Dearborn complex sprawled across 1,200 acres, employing 47,000 people who designed, engineered, and tested the vehicles that defined American transportation. After 22 years at Mac's single plant, Ford's scale was overwhelming. Patricia Donnelly introduced me to the supplier quality engineering team, 8 professionals responsible for auditing the 300 companies that provided components for Ford's North American operations. My cubicle overlooked the test track where prototype F-150s underwent brake performance evaluations, a daily reminder of why precision mattered in our industry. Greg, your first assignment is a follow-up audit at Midwest Automotive Components, Patricia said, handing me a thick file folder. 6 months ago, we identified significant quality issues with their brake pad materials. We need to verify that their corrective actions are sustainable. The irony was almost too perfect. After spending months fighting Kyle's cost-cutting measures from the inside, I'd now return as Ford's representative with authority to evaluate Mac's entire quality system. The audit was scheduled for October 15th, exactly 2 months after my retirement party at Murphy's Bar. I drove to Mac that Tuesday morning in my Ford Fusion, parking in the visitor spaces I had walked past every day for over 2 decades. The plant looked smaller somehow, maybe because I was seeing it through Ford's eyes instead of as an employee grateful just to have a job. Kyle met me at the security desk, professionally dressed and clearly nervous about the audit. He'd grown into the director of operations role somewhat, though the Northwestern confidence had been tempered by 6 months of actual manufacturing responsibility. "Greg, welcome back," Kyle said, extending his hand. "We've implemented all of Ford's corrective action requirements. I think you'll be impressed with the improvements we've made." The plant tour revealed mixed results. Kyle had hired 3 additional quality inspectors, including one with actual automotive experience from Delphi. The coordinate measuring machine now had 2 qualified operators. Instead of relying on Jason's inadequate training, material testing protocols had been formalized and documented according to Ford specifications. But I also noticed concerning trends. Great Lakes Steel was still MAC's primary supplier, though Kyle assured me they'd improved their quality control processes. The Mexican supplier, Frenos del Norte, had been replaced with a vendor from Vietnam that offered even lower prices. Cost pressure remained the driving force behind most decisions. Tommy Walsh showed me the updated quality procedures during lunch in the plant cafeteria. "Greg, Kyle's trying to do the right thing, but Jack Jameson is still pushing for cost reductions. Every month there's pressure to find cheaper suppliers, faster processes, more efficient methods. What about the Northwestern quality engineers Kyle hired? They mean well, but they don't understand why these specifications exist. Last week, one of them suggested we could reduce testing frequency because our supplier certifications are statistically reliable. I had to explain that statistical reliability doesn't prevent catastrophic failure. During my closing meeting with Mac's management team, I delivered Ford's preliminary findings. The corrective actions were adequate for maintaining current contracts, but sustainability remained questionable. Mac's quality system depended too heavily on individual knowledge rather than institutional processes. "Mr. Jameson, Ford's recommendation is continued monthly audits for the next 6 months," I reported to Jack, who looked older and more tired than I remembered. "Your quality improvements are positive, but the underlying cost pressures that created the original problems haven't been addressed." Jack nodded grimly. "Greg, I appreciate Ford's patience with our learning curve. Kyle and his team are committed to maintaining the highest standards." After the meeting, I visited Mom at Sunrise Manor. The Alzheimer's had progressed significantly since my retirement. She spent most days staring out her window, occasionally asking about people from her childhood who died decades ago. The nurses said she rarely spoke anymore, lost in memories that grew dimmer each day. "Hi, Mom," I said, settling into the chair beside her bed. "It's Greg, your son." She turned toward my voice with polite confusion. "That's a nice name. My son was named Greg, too. He worked at the car factory, just like his father did." For a moment, her eyes cleared slightly. "Are you sure we haven't met before? You seem familiar somehow." I held her hand and told her about my new job at Ford, about the plant where she'd worked 30 years ago, about the importance of building things that kept people safe. She listened quietly, sometimes nodding, sometimes drifting back into her private world of faded memories. Driving home that evening, I reflected on what I'd gained and lost over the past year. I'd prevented a potential recall that could have killed people, established quality standards that would protect future drivers, and earned respect from the industry's most demanding customer. My new salary allowed me to afford better care for Mom and help secure my own retirement, but the victory came with permanent costs. Mom would never again recognize the son she'd raised to stand up for what was right. I'd missed months of her final coherent conversations while fighting battles at MAC. The time lost to corporate politics and weekend audits couldn't be recovered, no matter how many quality problems I'd solved. 6 months later, MAC failed another Ford audit. Kyle's Northwestern engineers had gradually relaxed testing protocols, and quality issues began appearing in customer complaints again. Jack Jameson was forced to sell the company to a larger supplier that immediately restructured Mac's management team. Kyle called me when the sale was announced. "Greg, I wanted to thank you for everything you taught me about manufacturing. I'm taking a position with a consulting firm in Chicago, helping other companies improve their quality systems. Maybe I can prevent the mistakes I made at MAC." That conversation gave me hope that some lessons had been learned. Kyle would never be a manufacturing expert, but he'd gained respect for the complexity and responsibility that comes with building safety-critical components. Standing in my Ford office, looking out at the test track where engineers evaluated brake performance every day, I understood that victories in corporate America are always incomplete. You can fix systems, change processes, and prevent disasters, but you can't recover the personal costs of fighting those battles. My name is Greg Matthews. I spent 22 years learning that experience matters, quality can't be compromised, and standing up for what's right always comes with a price. Sometimes that price is worth paying, even when it costs you everything else that matters.